Hello everyone, and welcome to the GreenSQL. Protect your sensitive information using GreenSQL's real-time dynamic data masking. So first of all, let me please thank you all for joining us today. And this time on this webinar, we're going to talk about how easy it is to enforce real-time dynamic data masking. During this session, because of lack of time, I will not have a Q&A, but please feel free to contact me anytime, and you will see my email address, and actually you can contact all of us here at GreenSQL with any questions that you might have, including if you would like to have a copy of this presentation, including if you would like to have a personal and that one of our SEs or one of our support person can have a personal one-on-one session with you. So please feel free to contact us anytime with any questions that you might have. So information security is a major challenge. And this slide in front of you shows you just how big of an issue is information theft. It got to the point where information theft is a much greater crime than drugs. And even the FBI have managed to set that everything that have to do with data theft and with identity theft is bigger than drugs. And identity theft today is caused 92% by getting personal information from database. And getting this information by database can be done remotely using known exploits like SQL injections, or internally by authorized personnel that shouldn't have any access to sensitive information, but they've been able to retrieve this type of sensitive information. And this slide just shows you how big of an issue it is. Because if a few years ago it was a lot of organizations couldn't admit that sensitive information have been retrieved, today with the recent hacktivism attacks, and the hacktivism attacks comes to retrieve the sensitive information from the database and put it publicly on the internet. So we can see that the biggest organization worldwide, from Sony Ericsson to Lockheed Martin to Citibank to Nintendo to Amazon Zappos and more organizations have been suffering from sensitive information leakage. And all of this sensitive information is from databases. If 10 years ago it was about stealing a hard drive or stealing some sort of a media that includes records or sensitive information of customers, today everything is inside the database. And inside the database means that people are starting to understand the need to hide and mask sensitive information and not only secure the premises or secure the access to the database. So using GreenSQL, we worked extremely hard to provide an extremely easy to use solution that includes multiple features, and this session is about talking only about the masking. We are having about twice a month a webinar concerning all the other aspects of a unified database security. Feel free to join us in another webinar if you wish. This time we will focus about the masking features of the GreenSQL solution. So just before we start talking about the masking feature and how exactly the masking works, just a few words about how to use GreenSQL as a solution. GreenSQL, it's what's called a reverse proxy-based solution. This is a network proxy solution, which means that if currently your application, and it doesn't matter which application, it can be your development studio, it can be your web server, it can be your CRM application or ERP application, again, it doesn't matter which application you have. If your application is connecting directly to the database and the database response is being sent back directly, so when you implement GreenSQL, the connection goes first to the GreenSQL, only after it's been approved, and if needed, it's been also re-engineered, it's being sent to the database, and the results from your database are also coming back through GreenSQL solution. Because GreenSQL is a software-based solution, you have the option to install GreenSQL on a dedicated appliance or on a dedicated virtual appliance. You have the option to install it on the database itself or to install it on the application server. And because it's a reverse proxy solution, it means the only thing that you will be required to do is to reset your connection string to connect through GreenSQL solution. And when I'm talking about you have multiple options to implement GreenSQL, it means that running GreenSQL as a solution and putting it on a dedicated appliance means that you can protect multiple databases, and you can have the option to implement multiple masking rules using one implementation of GreenSQL. So GreenSQL comes to provide you the option also as a software solution to install it on the application server. And just to give you an example, many times a lot of organizations use what's called a cloud-based solution. So their application is running on some sort of a virtual private entity, virtual private machine, or over a cloud. It can be an Amazon cloud, or it can be a Rackspace cloud, and the database sometimes located still inside the headquarter premises. So in this example, when GreenSQL is installed at the application VPS, then you have the option not only to mask sensitive information at the application level, but also to increase the user experience using the caching feature, which is also integrated with the masking feature. And if you have only a one hosted solution, same server that runs your application and database server, again, it's not a problem. You can implement GreenSQL on the database server itself and just redirect your connection string over the application, or just change the port number over the database server in order to start using the GreenSQL solution. So, as I mentioned before, GreenSQL is a unified database security solutions that contains database security features, database auditing features, database performance features, and real-time dynamic data masking features. This session, we're going to focus about masking. So, how exactly real-time dynamic data masking works? Once an application, and it doesn't matter which application, the application have generated a query. Once you work with an application, and just to give you an example, I'm using a management studio, and during this session I will go through and I will show once in a time some sort of a management system or an application that is being used. When I'm using a database administrative level, and I would like to see information inside the database, for example, just retrieve the information from the table which is called employee under human resource. Once I've just generated this command to see the information, I have just entered a command which called select top 100 from AdventureWorks human resources.employee. And this type of query, when it's been generated, this is an application. And the application is connected to the database using most of the time it's over TCP/IP connection. And once this connection have been generated, my application have generated a query that have been sent to the database. Because, as I mentioned before, the GreenSQL sits between the database and between the application, which means that my application will always connect to the GreenSQL. And once the GreenSQL have received the query, it looks through the different policies that are configured in the GreenSQL, and it injected a transformation function inside of the query. And this behavior comes to make sure that you will not have to make any changes in your application or in your database once you choose to use this type of transformation function. So when GreenSQL have received the query, the original query, and decided to start adding it, which means that the GreenSQL will change the query and will inject a transformation function, a query including a transformation function will be sent to the database. And when the database received the query with the transformation function, the database will then send the already masked information back to the GreenSQL. And this is really important to understand that in a real-time dynamic data masking, your sensitive information never leaves the database. Because if your sensitive information have left the database, and then you have to rely on any type of a third-party application to make the sensitive information available only masked to the application. So using a real-time dynamic data masking, the sensitive information never leaves the database. So you can rest assured that it have never leaked because the query that have been received by the database already include a transformation function inside of it. And regarding the implementation, it's extremely important to say that it provides a complete level of transparency to your application. It doesn't matter if it's some sort of a management system or a web-based interface. It doesn't matter to the database. So it means that you will never have to configure or to make any changes inside your infrastructure. And when it comes to administrator transparency, it means that all of your DBAs, it doesn't matter if they are local DBAs or external DBAs, will never have the option to retrieve sensitive information from your database. This is really important to understand because a lot of our customers that use outsource database administrative services, for example, one of our biggest customers that is a major gambling company, one of the world greatest, they have almost 63 DBAs that are assisting them to maintain their huge database infrastructure. And when those database administrators are connecting to manage their databases, they are connecting through GreenSQL in order to make sure that sensitive information never leaves the databases, even to the DBAs. So administrative transparency is extremely important because when you enforce masking, it's not only about masking sensitive information from your application users, but it's also from your DBAs. And not about untrusting the DBAs, but it's more about controlling the sensitive information, which is extremely important in today's topology. So using GreenSQL, and it's only making sense because if we will talk now about the changes that happens to the query, and this is an SQL example. If my application have generated a select card number from a sales credit card, the query that the database will receive will look something like that. Select case 1 length credit card is equals or greater than 4, and then replace with a string that you can also manipulate it, and all this process is going completely automatically. I'm just explaining this in order to explain that the implementation, it doesn't concern you anymore how exactly the information have been accessed from who and from which source if the policy have already been implemented. And even though here you can see that we are making the database runs a transformation function, which means the database will work a little bit harder. So if there are going to be a lot of different types that will run this query, and the GreenSQL will automatically inject a transformation function inside of this query, so the database will have to run this transformation again and again and again, and it will reduce the performance. So in GreenSQL, we have also implemented a caching solution that with a patent that we wrote, we call it Smart Caching. And this technology will make sure that when you run a command that will mask sensitive information, the database will only have to run it once. So not only that you will increase security using the automated mask solution, but you will also be increasing performance because the caching feature will make sure that the result from the database that is already masked will serve the customers that will try to retrieve this information again and again. It's important to say that you can have multiple rules, and I will demonstrate it in a few minutes, for multiple database vendors. So when you run this command and when you use the masking features, you only have to implement one solution in order to mask sensitive information in multiple database vendors. Currently, GreenSQL supports Microsoft SQL, all version, including 2012, MySQL, all version, PostgreSQL, all version, and we believe in the near future, we will also support additional database vendors. So we talked about what exactly it does and how it works, but now it's really important for me to show you how easy it is to implement a real-time dynamic data masking rules using GreenSQL. So The management interface in GreenSQL is a web-based. So once you've installed GreenSQL, all you have to do is open your browser and connect to the management port of GreenSQL. We usually by default bind to port 5000 on the machine that you've installed GreenSQL upon. So once I've connected to the GreenSQL management interface, and as I mentioned before, we have multiple features that provide multiple database security features, you have a quick dashboard. And in this quick dashboard, you will be able to see the caching performance of the GreenSQL. You'll be able to see the recent most popular queries and also the caching performance per query if you wish. But on this session, we are focusing on the integration part and on the masking. So to implement GreenSQL, after you've installed it, all you have to do is to configure your database servers, where are the real database server, and it doesn't matter if it's the MS SQL database or MySQL database. And then you will have to configure a proxy. A proxy means the connection level that from now on your application have to connect to in order to take it forward. And it's really easy. All you have to do is to configure the port that you wish that your application will connect to. You will have the option to configure the real database that you have connected to. And if you have a replication to additional server, the GreenSQL will make sure, using a business continuity feature, that your connection will continue even if your main database server is not available for some reason. So the connection will be automatically forwarded to the secondary database server. In this example, it's just another database server that I configured which does replication. And you can also configure the number of retries that the GreenSQL will try to connect to the main database server before it retransforms the connection to the replication server. Once you have both set up and running, and you can see in the proxy list that because it's checking it that it's what's called in an active mode, you will have the option to see that both proxies are active. And in this configuration example, we have a Microsoft SQL proxy up and running with 2 database servers, and we have a Sugar CRM application using MySQL up and running. Once I got those 2 up and running, I will go to the masking feature. And inside the masking feature, I have what's called an events where I can see the events, I can see the archived events information, and I have additional settings. Inside the policy, I will have the option to create a policy of the masking features in just a few seconds. I will go to Create New, and inside the Create New, I will choose on which database exactly I would like to create the masking policies. I will choose AdventureWorks. And inside the AdventureWorks, I have the option to limit, and I will go through it in a little bit more in depth. Inside creating a rule, I can define the different source, which means that if I would like to have a masking policy that will mask information only to a specific user, if I would like to have it masking information only to a specific application, I have the option to implement this type of policy. And also, if, for example, I have a web server that is connected from the DMZ that is available to the internet as well, and I would like to make sure that any connection coming from the IP address or the IP addresses from my DMZ environment, I can then make sure that everything that is connecting from this environment, the information that is trying to be retrieved will be automatically masked. And inside the configuration level, what's called the destination of which information I'd like to mask, I can choose a full table or even up to a column level. And the action will be to choose which type of a masking behavior will be enabled. One more notice before we continue and configure the rule, using what's called the Microsoft Double Hop, if you are in a Windows Active Directory environment, you can then make sure that the username is not only the database username, but it can also be your application username where you would like to enforce a policy upon. So using the GreenSQL, as I mentioned before, just to show you how easy it is to run this policy, here again I have what's called a management solution. And in this example, I'm demonstrating you how exactly a DBA works. and a DBA have the option to manage your database. So as a DBA, I'm running a connection to the database, and I have the option to run almost any query that I wish. For example, if I would like to see the information not only inside my human resources, this is the database, which is called AdventureWorks, but also to go to production, and inside production I would like to see the product information, I have the option to view the information inside of this database as well. If I will go to the database which is called sales, under the table which is called credit card, I have the option to see that credit card information now. So using GreenSQL, I have the option to, using an administrative management system, I have the option to retrieve any type of information that I wish. So in this example, let's just check out the information of our employees. So retrieving this information as a DBA or as any type of application, I can see that a lot of sensitive information is available to whoever have the rights to retrieve this sensitive information. For example, the national ID number, the login ID, the title, as well as the birth date, and so on and so on. So the DBA can actually take this information and just export it, and for example, even not by hazard usage, which means not by just by a mistake, this information can leak out of the organization. Using GreenSQL, I've noticed that here under employee, I have a few sensitive columns: the national ID number, the login ID, and, for example, the title. So when I go to a policy under GreenSQL, I have the option to choose up to a column level, which columns I would like to mask. By pressing the new, the GreenSQL will automatically crawl through the database and will provide me a quick view regarding my database infrastructure architecture. So, for example, I've noticed that under Human Resources, under Employee, I have all those sensitive columns. For example, the login ID. And when I can choose multiple columns at the same time, or I can choose each policy to a different column. In this example, for example, we will mask just the login ID now. After choosing the login ID, the GreenSQL automatically checks the type of the column and the type of the table in order to provide me an appropriate masking behavior. So in this example, I would like, for example, to mask everything in the login ID. So once I create this rule, and we can see this rule very easily, the database is AdventureWorks, I chose the option mask all, and the target is this specific column under this architecture. When the DBL will re-execute this query, you can see that the login ID have been automatically masked. And we choose to mask everything, but just to give you an example, under national ID number, I would like just to mask half of it, just the last 4 digits, for example. So going back to the GreenSQL management interface, by choosing additional rule inside the AdventureWorks database, and by pressing new at the column, I have the option to choose again multiple or just a specific column that I wish. And I've seen that under Human Resources Employee, I also have a national ID number. And the national ID number, I can then decide to use a last 3 masking or last 4 masking. And also I can choose to mask it to X or to zeros. So when creating this rule and just re-executing this query, I can see now that the entire last 4 digits of the national ID number are now 0. So no one can really get this information. In GreenSQL, even though we've seen that creating these 2 rules provides me the option to mask the sensitive information, but when it comes to a national ID number, I would like to mask it just to a specific user. So I can create the IP address of my users. I can choose a database user that is being used, for example, just to mask sensitive information from my system administrator. Or I can also choose a specific application to mask it to. And those entities I can manage, in a few seconds I will show you where, in order to decide on which source this masking behavior will run. So I'm sure you've heard, and we'll go back to the example in just a few seconds, that there are many different solutions in the market that provides you what's called a static masking solution. And at this example, as I've shown you before, what's happening in real time is the database receives a different query than the query that have been generated by the application level. So the main differences, and this is a really important comparison between the two, what exactly is happening? So first of all, as I mentioned before, GreenSQL is an inline reverse SQL proxy, which means that the connection string goes through the GreenSQL. You have the option to create multiple rules, and it's not just an ETL approach, which means a script that runs and retrieves the information and puts it in a different location once it masks. You have the option to enable or disable it according to your wish. You have the option to implement it in a complete transparency to the application level and to the database level, which means no one from the application level, besides the QA to make sure that everything works, have to be part of the implementation of the reverse proxy that will provide you real-time dynamic data masking. And it's really important to say, because there are no changes in any way, not in the database level and not in the application level, the solution is appropriate for a production as well as a non-production solution. Today, with time, when there are endless number of divisions inside of companies that provides you the option and requires you to mask sensitive information and to provide, just to give you an example, a training division inside of your organization. A training division that must have a connection to the application that is being used by your real users and customers. The training division must use an application. In many times today, a lot of organizations duplicate the database in order to remove sensitive information. GreenSQL provides you the option to use the same database without the need to duplicate your database in real time, without the fear that sensitive information will appear to new employees that are currently under the training division. So using GreenSQL provides you the option to reduce your costs and to reduce the need to purchase another server, another database license, another few hours to duplicate and mask the data inside of the duplicate server. So using GreenSQL, you have the option to reduce the cost of your IT infrastructure using GreenSQL. Just going back to the policy in order to show you what exactly we went through, the policy was extremely simple. And in this example, we've seen that we will also mask the title, by the way, in just a few seconds. We've seen that access to the database, and it doesn't matter which type of an access, the access can be performed using administrative level, or it can also be used by any type of an application. This specific application is Sugar CRM, one of the most used CRM applications worldwide. And this type of application retrieves sensitive information from the database. And in this example, the Sugar CRM is actually using a MySQL database server. So using the GreenSQL, as we've seen before, at the current time we have just two different policies. One that masks everything inside of the login ID column, and the other one masks just the last 4 digits at the national ID number. Let's just, for the example, create additional rule. And it's important to say that if at the beginning I'd like to mask multiple columns, I can choose a few multiple columns at the same time. So here again, I will just choose human resources, employees, and the title as well because it's sensitive information for me. And under the title, I would like to use even just the option to choose last 4 masking, last 3 masking using X. So when it comes to a title, some of the information inside of the title can be sensitive, but if I will run this command again, just will re-execute it, I can see that the last 4 digits of the title have been masked. It's really important to understand that the information inside the database have not changed in any way. and it doesn't require you to duplicate your database name in order to store the masked information. It's completely transparent to the application. It's only affecting the presentation level of the information that have been retrieved by the application. As well as we've seen before, we have the option to create multiple rules to multiple databases. So after I've configured the different proxies, I can then configure the different databases that I'd like to use as part of the configuration. So choosing the database, the system automatically detects each and every database that have passed through the GreenSQL. So if I would like to choose another database, all I have to do is to press the plus, and I can add it according to the appropriate configuration. And this assists me when I choose the masking policy to choose the appropriate database that I'd like to enforce. For example, this is the Sugar CRM database. The different columns that I would like to mask sensitive information upon. For example, if I will press New, the GreenSQL will automatically retrieve the entire infrastructure of the database and will provide me the option to choose up to a column level which columns I would like to mask and using which masking behavior, as we've seen before. So here I can see in front of me all the different tables and columns that are inside of the database. For example, all my users, and under users I have the option to choose a specific columns that I wish. And when I choose the columns, I can then decide, even for multiple columns, okay, which type of a masking behavior I would like to enable. And the GreenSQL automatically checks which types of columns and table that have been created, so the behavior that you choose will support those types of columns. And then you can enable the rule as you wish. You can also generate an alert over email alert if you wish, so you will be alerted when someone have tried to retrieve this information, even though it have been masked. But sometimes it's important to know that someone tried to retrieve this information in a specific time frame or from a specific location. You will be alerted once it happens. Inside the GreenSQL policies, you have the option to create as many policies as you wish, and you can have the option to disable any policy in real time, which means if just, for example, you would like just to rerun this specific command, we can see that I have disabled the rule that masks the national ID number, and in just 1 second I can see that the real information is appearing again. And you can see inside the policy that I've just disabled this rule. So talking about GreenSQL, and as I mentioned before with GreenSQL, GreenSQL is a software-based reverse proxy solution, which means that even if you run your infrastructure on a cloud-based, what's called infrastructure as a service, and you have your own VPS and your own database, you can then use GreenSQL to mask the different sensitive information that is stored inside of your database, inside of a cloud infrastructure. So to sum up the solution, we have just talked about the masking feature of GreenSQL, but GreenSQL have multiple database security features that you can enable and use according to your own use. GreenSQL is available for a download under greensql.com, so you can evaluate the masking features. If you would like any more information or to have a more personal demonstration to answer your specific question, you can email us at any time, and we'll be more than happy to provide you a personal session in order to make sure that your infrastructure supports GreenSQL and all the features that you're interested are available. During the next few months, we will be releasing additional features of GreenSQL in order to have a role-based masking features as well as other different features. So please feel free to contact us at any time, and I would like to thank you all for joining us to this session. Have a great day, and thank you again.